Slow, deliberate opening tone, low and steady. What if the most terrifying moment of your life didn't begin with a scream or a crash or a warning of any kind, but with something as quiet and ordinary as a door closing? What if the thing that changed you forever didn't announce itself? What if it just appeared in your house, in your room, in the dark, standing close enough to touch you while you slept? Tonight we are stepping inside 4 real accounts, 4 ordinary nights that became something people are still carrying in their bones years later. These are not legends. These are not campfire tales dressed up to frighten you. These are the memories of real people, told in their own words, relived every time the house goes quiet and the lights go low. My name is Fear Within the Mind, and if you found this channel, something tells me you already know that the most terrifying place in the world isn't a haunted house or a dark forest. It's the moment you realize you are not alone when you're supposed to be. Before we go any further, drop a comment right now and tell us where in the world you're watching from. We have listeners from every corner of this earth, and we love seeing that community light up with every new story. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a single episode of Fear Within the Mind. Now, let's go in. Story 1, The Closet. I was 12 years old the night I learned that an empty house is never really empty. My parents had gone out for the evening, leaving me in the care of my 18-year-old brother, Zach. That arrangement lasted about as long as it took for their car to turn off the street. The moment it did, Zach was already reaching for his jacket. He told me he'd be back in a few hours, told me not to breathe a word to Mom and Dad, and he was gone. He left me with a house to myself and a promise he clearly intended to keep only on his end. At first, I told myself that was fine. I was 12. I thought having the whole place to myself felt like some kind of freedom, a big house, a whole night. Just me. I had no idea what I was about to learn. I wandered into the den and made the first of many poor choices that night. I put on a horror movie, and for a while, I was fine. I watched with the lights off, wrapped in a blanket, telling myself I wasn't scared. But somewhere around the halfway mark, the movie stopped being the problem. It was the house itself that got into my head. The random creaks from the floorboards, that deep settling groan old houses make when no one is walking on them. The wind pressing against the windows from outside like something testing whether they'd hold. The refrigerator clicking on in the kitchen, loud and sudden in the silence. Every sharp sound from the screen made me flinch, and every time I flinched, I found myself looking over my shoulder toward the half flight of stairs behind the couch, just staring at the space where someone could stand and watch me without me ever knowing. I couldn't take it anymore. I didn't know why I was doing this to myself. I shut off the television and I ran. Not walked, ran up the stairs and down the hall to my room the way you run when you're a kid and you've just turned out the last light. Because something ancient in you insists that whatever lives in the dark starts moving the exact second you can no longer see it. I made it to my room. I brushed my teeth as fast as I could in the connected bathroom, trying to slow my breathing, telling myself to get it together. Then I grabbed my controller and loaded up Call of Duty Zombies on my Xbox 360. That helped. For a while, I was somewhere else entirely. The game pulled me in and I lost track of the time, stopped listening to the house, stopped thinking about shadows and creaks and empty rooms. We played for hours. Eventually, my team died. I got frustrated, decided it was late, and shut everything down. I lay back and closed my eyes. That's when I felt it. A low, heavy vibration moving up through the walls and floor. The front door. Someone had just come in. I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. Zach. He was home. Everything was fine. I lay still and listened, waiting to hear his footsteps take the familiar path. Straight through the entryway, up the stairs, into his room. That was always how it went. That was the routine. The footsteps didn't come upstairs. There was movement on the lower level instead, quiet at first. A subtle shuffle, a low thud. Footsteps that stopped and started again and didn't follow any pattern I could make sense of. The sounds built slowly in my chest. Not panic yet, just unease. That particular kind of wrong feeling that your body picks up on before your brain catches up. I sat up. I waited. The sounds kept coming. I got out of bed and moved to the window, slow and quiet. I looked down into the driveway where Zach always parked. His car wasn't there. The driveway was empty. I stood at that window for a moment that felt much longer than it was. I processed what I was seeing, or rather, what I was not seeing, and I felt my stomach drop completely. Whatever was moving around downstairs was not my brother. I had no cell phone. I was 12 years old. There was no way to reach anyone, not my parents, not Zach. Without going downstairs and getting to one of the house phones, and going downstairs felt like something I simply could not make my legs do. I moved to my bedroom door instead and checked the lock. It was locked. Then I remembered that interior door locks like mine could be opened from the other side with nothing more than a fingernail slipped into the small slot. If someone wanted through that door, the lock was decoration. I looked around my room. My eyes found the small crawl-in closet built into the wall. And something in me, instinct, fear, some base and animal part of my brain, made the decision before I'd consciously formed a thought. I moved to the closet, opened the door as quietly as I could manage, squeezed myself inside, and pulled it shut behind me. I sat in the dark and I told myself to breathe. I told myself it was Zach, that he'd parked somewhere else, that there was a perfectly ordinary explanation, and in a minute, I would hear his voice, and I would climb out of this closet feeling completely ridiculous, and we'd laugh about it later, and that would be the whole story. Then I heard someone fumbling with my bedroom door. The lock clicked. The door opened, and someone came into my room. I stopped breathing entirely. I pressed myself into the back corner of that closet, and I made myself as small as I possibly could. I listened. The floorboards moved under the weight of someone walking, a deliberate, unhurried sound, back and forth across the room. Things were being moved, shifted, picked up and set down. At one point, I heard something being dragged slowly across the floor, and the sound of it moved through me in a way I still feel when I think about it now. I don't know how long I stayed in that closet. It felt like hours. It was probably much less. I stayed long after the footsteps had gone quiet, long after the sounds from my room had stopped, long after the house had gone completely still. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Eventually, I heard a voice from somewhere across the house. Familiar, urgent, confused, and angry. Zach. He was home. He came into my room and called my name. I pushed the closet door open and stepped out into the room. My hands were shaking so badly, I couldn't hold them still. I started explaining as fast as I could. I watched my brother's face go from irritation to confusion to something else entirely. Because the moment I told him someone had been in my room while I was hiding, he told me someone had been in his room too. His things had been disturbed. Something felt wrong. We walked through the house together and we found out just how wrong it was. Drawers pulled out and emptied onto the floor. Electronics gone. Televisions. Gaming consoles. Someone had moved through our home quietly and methodically, while I cowered in a closet and prayed that I was wrong. Zach called the police. We waited together, going through the house a second time, checking windows and doors. Officers came, took a report, asked their questions, told us they would follow up and that we should wait for our parents. Around 4 o'clock in the morning, my parents came home. My father walked through the door and hit Zach across the face before the boy could get a word out. Not for leaving the front door unlocked. My mother came straight to me and pulled me into her arms and told me she was just glad I was safe. Zach was made to pay back the cost of everything stolen, slowly, month by month. My mother checked on me for weeks. But even with the police report filed and the house cleaned up and the days moving on, the experience didn't leave me the way I expected it to. I still think about that closet. The darkness inside it, the stillness, the sound of footsteps crossing my floor toward the closet door, the way every second felt like it could be the last one before the door came open. I think about how I had nowhere left to go. And I think about the fact that the only thing standing between me and whoever was in that room was luck. Story 2, David. When I was very small, not yet old enough for kindergarten, I lived with my grandparents in a quiet, small town where everyone knew everyone else. The kind of place where doors stayed unlocked and neighbors became something close to family. My parents had separated. My father worked in the next town over and came to see me on weekends. My uncle, my father's brother, lived with us too, which meant the house was almost never truly empty. There was always someone, always a voice, a television in the next room, the smell of something cooking. I was too young to understand fear the way older children do. I just understood home, and home felt safe. We had a neighbor I'll call David. He was a permanent fixture in our lives in the way that certain neighbors become over years. He watched hockey and wrestling with my uncle. He helped my grandfather with yard work and truck repairs. When my grandfather came home from hunting with a moose, David was there to help haul it to the shed. He shared beers and conversations, and the comfortable ease of a man who had long since been folded into the rhythm of our household. He was not a stranger. He was simply part of the world as I understood it. One evening, my grandmother had gone to bingo. My grandfather decided to head out and pick her up when she called for a ride. He asked if I wanted to come along. I said no. I was watching cartoons and didn't want to stop. He reminded me the way he always did. Don't open the door for strangers. Then he left. The moment his truck pulled away from the house, everything went quiet. A few minutes later, someone knocked at the front door. I ran up and called out, asking who was there. David's voice answered. I told him through the door that my grandparents weren't home. He said he knew. He'd seen my grandfather leaving just now. I told him my uncle wasn't there either. He said he knew that too. He'd spoken to my uncle earlier and knew he was out with friends. There was a brief pause. Then he asked me to let him in. Something in me hesitated. It was small and quiet, more instinct than thought. I told him I wasn't allowed to open the door for strangers. He pushed back gently, reasonably. He wasn't a stranger, was he? He was our neighbor. I already knew him. My child's mind turned that over and found it logically sound. He wasn't a stranger, he was David. I still couldn't quite understand why he would come over when no one was home. But I unlocked the door and opened it. David filled the doorway. Even at that age, I could see that something was off. He was swaying slightly, his eyes not quite focusing right, his words coming out thick and slow. He was drunk. But I had seen my uncle drunk before, and it hadn't frightened me then. I told David he could wait in the kitchen while I went back to my cartoons. He put both hands on my shoulders. I tried to move toward the living room. His hands didn't move with me. I tried to pull his hands off. I was a small child. I couldn't. His voice changed. Not raised. Something worse than raised. Something that narrowed and sharpened and carried a weight inside it that I couldn't name then, but have never forgotten. He said things I can't fully recall now. Only the fear they put into me. Only the way my small body understood, on a level below language, that something had gone terribly wrong. He dragged me into the kitchen. He pulled open a drawer. When he turned back toward me, he was holding a large knife. He pressed the tip of it against my stomach and asked me if I wanted to be stabbed. When I started to cry, he told me to be quiet or he would cut my tongue. He drew the dull spine of the blade slowly across my throat, so I would understand that he meant every word. I was very small, I was completely alone, and I understood. Then I heard tires on the gravel outside. My grandparents' truck. Car doors closing. My grandmother came through the front door smiling, and then she saw us. The smile dropped completely. She screamed for my grandfather. He came through the door behind her and took in the scene in an instant, and something transformed in him. He charged forward, shouting, demanding to know what was happening, his voice cutting through the kitchen like something ancient and furious. David shoved me to the floor. My grandmother was already there. She swept me up and turned me away from what was happening behind us, pressing my face into her shoulder, telling me over and over that it was okay, that I was safe, that it was over now. I could still hear everything. The sounds of a struggle, something crashing, my grandfather's voice, and then finally quiet. When I looked up, my grandfather was shoving David out the front door and slamming it so hard the walls shook. I grew up. Life moved forward in the way that life does. Years became many years. I sat with my grandmother after my grandfather's funeral. Two people going through shared memories, the way you do when someone is gone, and their absence makes everything sharper. And I brought up that night. I told her how brave Grandpa had been, how I still thought about it, how it stayed with me. She looked uneasy. She mentioned, carefully, that my grandfather had gone out hunting later that same night. She said she didn't remember why. She said she didn't remember much about it. I have thought about that a great deal over the years. They never called the police. They never pressed charges. David simply disappeared from our lives completely, and no one ever explained it to me. Not fully. My grandfather was a deeply respected man in that community, a churchgoer, a good hunter, a man who was known and trusted, who had longtime friends among the local officers, who understood the land and what it kept quiet. No one would have looked twice at a tarp in the back of his truck, driving out of town late at night. I don't know what happened to David. I only know that he was never seen in our town again after that night, and something in my grandmother's eyes, whenever that evening came up, told me that the full story belonged only to her and to a man who was no longer alive to tell it. Story 3, Neil. This one happened during spring break in 2020. I was 15 years old, home alone for the night while my parents were out of town. I was doing nothing in particular, just in my room, killing time, when I got a call from a mutual from school. Someone I barely talked to. Someone I hadn't expected to hear from. I'll call him Mason. He asked what I was doing. I told him nothing, just hanging around the house. Then he asked if he could drop off a friend of mine who needed somewhere to stay for the night. The friend was someone I'd known since 3rd grade, someone I'll call Neil. I said no. I wasn't in the mood for company. I wanted a quiet night. But Mason pushed, and there was something in his voice I couldn't quite locate. A kind of pressure underneath his words, a desperation that didn't match the casual surface of what he was asking. He kept pushing, and then he told me he'd let me use his weed pen if I said yes. I caved. It was a stupid reason. I know that now. I knew it somewhat then. But I was 15, and that was the logic I was working with. I had heard that week, through my brother and a few mutual friends, that Neil had been acting strangely at school. Strange enough that people were talking about it. My brother said Neil had started laughing suddenly in completely silent classrooms. No warning, no reason, just erupting into laughter and then going quiet again. He'd been saying bizarre things to people, claiming that the basketball coaches were Freemasons, working to convert the boys on the team. I listened and thought, well, that's just Neil being Neil. He was always outgoing, always pushing limits, always saying things without a filter. I didn't take it seriously. I should have. I met Mason and Neil at the front door. I hit the pen. Mason handed it back. And then, before leaving, Mason grabbed Neil by both shoulders, grabbed him firmly, seriously, the way you grip someone when you desperately need them to hear you. And with tears forming in his eyes, he begged Neil not to do that thing. He said it quietly and urgently. Neil looked back at him with a blank, flat expression and said simply that he understood. I did not ask what that thing was. I have turned that over in my mind many times since. I don't know why I didn't ask. I just let Mason leave and close the door. The moment the door shut, Neil looked at me and asked whether all the doors in the house were locked. Something in my chest immediately tightened. I told him they were. He asked me to check anyway, so I walked him through the house, back door, laundry room door, both confirmed locked. He didn't respond. We stood in the narrow hallway in silence for a few seconds. And then, without any warning or introduction, his arm rose slowly, straight up, like a child raising a hand in a classroom. And his mouth stretched into a wide, toothy smile that didn't move and didn't reach his eyes. He held that pose for several long seconds, and then lowered his arm without saying a word or changing his expression. I forced a laugh. My hands had already started sweating. Neil asked for water. We went to the kitchen. I turned to the refrigerator and reached in for 2 bottles. And when I turned back around, Neil was standing at the silverware drawer. His hand was on the handle. He was pulling it open slowly, and his other hand was already reaching inside. I covered the distance between us without deciding to move. I grabbed his wrist before his fingers closed around the handle of the steak knife inside. I slammed the drawer shut with my other hand. Neil did not flinch. He did not react. He just looked at me and let out a quiet, soft chuckle, as if I had misread something harmless, as if this was all a misunderstanding. Every hair on my body was standing up. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. I had never in my life felt the specific and total fear of believing I might not make it through the next few minutes. I felt it then, completely. And all I could think, underneath all of it, was, how do I get him out of this house? I suggested we walk to the park in the neighborhood. Neil agreed immediately. I walked him through the laundry room and out the side door into the driveway, making sure he went out first. I told him I needed to put my shoes on. He paused before stepping away, looking back at me with an expression I can't fully describe. Something flat and disappointed, and told me to hurry up. I shut the door. I locked it. I called my brother and told him everything. He arrived with 3 friends in under 5 minutes. They found Neil outside and kept him talking while I stayed inside, watching through a window, trying to slow my breathing. Neil talked for a long time. He told them the basketball coaches were part of the Illuminati. He told them the initiation process involved things I won't repeat here. He told them his father was going to kill him and that he couldn't go home. He said all of it with the same calm, flat certainty. No drama, no performance. He just believed it. Eventually, one of my brother's friends drove Neil home. I called Mason afterward. I needed to know what had happened in that car before they showed up at my door. Mason told me that during the ride over, Neil had been reading aloud from something he'd written, a kind of manifesto stating that in order to prevent his father from killing him, he needed to either kill himself or kill someone else. Mason had panicked. He hadn't known what to do. So he'd driven to my house and handed the situation off to me without a single word of warning. I was furious. I was also aware that part of the failure was mine for not asking the right questions when I had the chance. About a month later, the full picture emerged. Neil had taken substances that triggered a psychiatric break, diagnosed as a schizophrenic episode during which he was hearing voices that felt entirely real to him. He got help, he recovered, he's okay, but I still think about the kitchen. I think about how close his hand was to that knife. I think about the half second between my turning around and reaching him. I think about what would have happened if I had been a little slower, a little less alert, a little more inclined to give him the benefit of the doubt. I think about it more than I probably should. Story 4. The window. I was 10 years old when this happened, and I want you to sit with that for a moment before we go any further. 10 years old. My mom had asked me that afternoon if I wanted to go grocery shopping with her. I made a big deal out of saying no. It was warm and sunny outside. I wanted to shoot hoops in the street. I told her nothing bad would happen, that she'd only be gone a couple of hours. She gave in. She pulled out of the driveway, and I grabbed the basketball from the garage and I started playing. I did my usual things, running back and forth, setting up little game scenarios in my head. Down by 1 point, final seconds on the clock, everything riding on this shot. I was sweating, happy, completely inside the kind of afternoon that belongs entirely to being a kid with nothing to worry about. At some point, I stopped to catch my breath. I was bouncing the ball slowly, looking around the neighborhood, letting my lungs recover. And that's when I looked up at the house. There was someone in my sister's upstairs window. A shape, a shadow standing back from the glass, just far enough from the sunlight to avoid being fully visible. Still, not moving, looking out toward the street. My sister was away at college. My father was at work. My mother was across town. Nobody was supposed to be in that house. I stood in the street and stared. The shape shifted slightly, just enough, just that small and unmistakable movement of something that is alive and present and real. It was not the light. It was not a trick. It was a person standing at my sister's window, and that person was looking down at me. I dropped the basketball without meaning to, and my brain went completely blank for a moment. The kind of blank that comes before the panic arrives fully formed. And then I ran. Around the side of the house, through the backyard gate, through the back door, slamming it shut and calling up the staircase, asking who was home. My voice broke when I called out. For a moment there was nothing. Then a voice answered from upstairs. "Rad, come upstairs." It was not my mother. It was not my father. It was not my sister. The voice had calibrated itself. That's the only word I have for it. It had taken care to sound ordinary, to sound like someone who had every right to be there, to sound normal. But it landed wrong. The pitch was wrong. The ease of it was wrong. The fact that it knew my name was wrong in a way that I could feel in the soles of my feet. I did not go near the stairs. I grabbed the phone off the kitchen counter and I ran back outside and I called my mother. I told her someone was in the house. She told me that wasn't funny. She said she was almost done shopping, and that if she found out I was messing around, there would be consequences. I started crying. I told her I wasn't joking. I told her there was a person upstairs and they knew my name, and they called down to me from my sister's window. By the time I was sobbing into the phone, she believed me. She said she was leaving the store right now. She must have called the police on her way home because the cruiser pulled up at the exact moment her car turned into the driveway. Officers went inside. My mother followed after a minute. I stayed outside and stared at the window. Nothing appeared at it again. They searched everything. Every room, every closet, under every bed, behind every piece of furniture, the attic. They found nothing. No one. They told me it was safe. My mother said she believed me, but her voice said something slightly different. She said if she ever found out I was making things up, I'd answer for it. I kept telling her I wasn't. She kept saying she knew. That night I lay awake for a long time before exhaustion finally pulled me under. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. The room was dark. Still, I came out of sleep slowly, the way you do when you're not sure what woke you. Not quite a sound, just the sense that something had changed in the air. I sat up. My eyes adjusted to the dark the way eyes do. Shapes emerging from the blackness gradually. My dresser, my shelves, my closet door slightly open. And across the room, not far from where I was sitting, I saw something that did not belong. A shape, tall, completely still, darker than everything around it. A person standing in my bedroom, watching me sleep. For a moment, I thought I was still dreaming. For a moment, the shape was just a shape, and my sleeping brain was still catching up. And then the figure moved. The faintest, most subtle shift of weight, and every sleeping part of me came fully and instantly awake. I screamed. It was not a small sound. It tore out of me completely, involuntary and total. And the figure reacted in the same instant. 2 long steps across the room to my window, sliding it open in one motion and dropping out into the night. I heard feet hit the awning below the window with a heavy, solid thud. My parents came through the bedroom door. My father ran straight to the window and looked out, then turned and ran downstairs and out the back door, I believe barefoot, trying to find whoever it was. He came back minutes later out of breath and shaking his head. They called the police again. Officers came, walked the neighborhood, filed another incident report. We never found out who it was. We don't know how long he had been in the house. We don't know if he had hidden there since the afternoon, moving through the rooms, while I played basketball outside, waiting patiently for the house to go dark. We don't know how many times he slipped in and out through that window. We don't know what he did while he was inside. What I know is this. At some point during that day, before I ever looked up and saw him standing at my sister's window, he had learned my name. And that night, while I slept, he stood in the darkness of my room and watched me. And I have never fully stopped thinking about what he intended to do next. Quiet, steady closing. The truth is, and this is something I think about often, most of us will go our whole lives without something like this happening. But the people in tonight's stories didn't know that. They couldn't know it. They were just living, just going about the small and ordinary business of their lives until they weren't. Stay aware. Stay present. Trust the feeling in your chest when something doesn't sit right. Because more often than not, that feeling knows something before your brain catches up. This has been Fear Within the Mind. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from tonight. We want to hear from every single one of you. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, now is the time. Hit that button, ring that bell, and come back for the next story. Because there's always another one. Sleep well, and we'll see you soon.